Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here, and it is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week. Actually, breaches of the week. Last week was actually all the data breaches, hacking, all those kinds of things on Ukraine, but the world hasn't stopped, even though Ukraine is at war with Russia, and obviously our focus, mine as well, has been on that, not just for my public side, but also business as well. But I want to get back and start catching up on a lot of those data breaches that essentially we have missed in the last couple of weeks or so by virtue of the situation in Ukraine. And so with that, I want to dive in. We'll brush up a little bit on Ukraine here as well with some updates, but for the most part, these are data breaches outside or possibly outside the theater of conflict, meaning cyber warfare. Now, here's what's going on. And before we begin, as always, I'd like to thank the following people that sent me a lot of this information, and that would be Jason Dance, Barrett Peterson, Chris Fellon, and Jacqueline Wolf. Thank you so much, even though I have not been nearly as responsive as I normally am when everybody sends me breaches. You guys stuck in there, and it was so important because you helped me out tremendously as I'm doing research, obviously sitting here, not in my normal office as I'm traveling on the road for work. So with that, I want to get started with an unnamed healthcare provider in Canada who, quite frankly, had an awful week about 2 weeks ago. And here's what happened, because in early December, this healthcare provider in Canada was hit by two separate ransomware actors with different tactics. Now, the first ransomware group was Karma, and they exfiltrated data, but they did not encrypt the systems because the targeted organization was in healthcare, and they claimed that in their ransom note that they dropped. The second group, identified as Conti, you may know them, I've talked about them extensively here on Breaches of the Week, really didn't have that reservation and finished the job. In less than a day after the Karma gang dropped their ransom notes, Conti deployed their ransomware. Apparently, Sophos' rapid response team had just begun talking with the targeted company hours earlier, and the customer had not yet deployed any of the new software that Sophos was going to be providing them to the portion of the network where the ransomware essentially had been staged. And there you go. It was executed by the Conti gang, and so existing anti-malware measures did not impede the attack. And obviously, gone are the days of traditional antivirus, which is apparently what they had. But that is very interesting, and I think it also really underscores the point that if you've got open vulnerabilities, it's not just one gang that's necessarily going to be looking at this, it's the world that can be looking at this, and they had not one, but two, one with, quite frankly, a little more respect in the sense that they wouldn't hit healthcare. Conti doesn't care. So there you go, that unnamed healthcare provider in Canada. I hope you're back on your feet with whatever products you're using, Sophos and otherwise. Moving on, let's talk about Samsung. Samsung, obviously the massive maker of mobile phones and electronics and all that kind of stuff. You probably have Samsung anything in your life, even if you're an iPhone user. Now here's what's going on. The Lapsus Data Extortion Group leaked the other day a huge collection of confidential data that they claim to be from Samsung Electronics out of South Korea. Now, shortly after teasing their followers, Lapsus published a description of the upcoming leak, saying that it contains, quote, confidential Samsung source code essentially obtained from this data breach. And what they're claiming to have is simply this: source code for every trusted applet installed in Samsung's Trust Zone environment used for sensitive operations. So examples would be hardware cryptography, binary encryption, access control, those kinds of things. Also, they say they got algorithms for all biometric unlock operations. They got bootloader source code for all recent Samsung devices, so heads up Samsung mobile users. Confidential source codes from Qualcomm, source code for Samsung's activation servers, for full source code for technology used for authorizing and authenticating Samsung accounts, including APIs and services. If the details of this are accurate, that is a huge problem for Samsung, as they've just suffered a major data breach, not to mention the fact that this potentially makes millions and millions of their devices worldwide vulnerable to these kinds of attacks. And so Samsung is probably scrambling to update your phone, your TV, your Samsung, anything. You got a toaster from Samsung, it's probably caught up in this. So there you go. Huge issue with Samsung, and hopefully Samsung is in the process of fixing this for every Samsung user. I know I have Samsung products in my life. Odds are you do too. Moving on, let's talk about video game developer Ubisoft, because they confirmed that they suffered a cybersecurity incident that caused disruptions to their games, systems, and services in the last couple of weeks. This announcement came after multiple Ubisoft users had reported issues the week prior accessing the Ubisoft service. The data extortion group Lapsus, aka from Samsung, has also claimed responsibility for this one, because again, they're also hitting Samsung and some others I'm going to be talking about here as well. So this is obviously a huge thing. Lapsus, and that's LAPSUS $, is making waves in the last couple of weeks, and I've got some thoughts on that as we get through this. Moving on, I want to talk about Ukrainian publication Pravda, not to be confused with the Russian state propaganda news outlet called Pravda as well. I believe they're two separate things, but we're going to find out. But this is an interesting one, and hear me out on this, because here's what's going on. The Ukrainian newspaper Pravda leaked what appear to be the personal data of 120,000 Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine, and if confirmed, we're probably looking at one of basically the greatest leaks in wartime, ever. Now this is 6,000, or I should say over 6,600 pages of names, registration numbers, and places of service for Russian personnel. That is obviously huge. Now obviously war includes disinformation on both sides, so I cannot fully confirm this like I can everything else where I get multiple sources usually before I talk about it, but I think this was a really interesting one, and I actually went to the Pravda Ukrainian website. I don't speak English, but obviously there are things like Google Translate. So take that for what it's worth. But if that is true, that is incredibly damning, essentially, to the Russian military. And not that many people globally are complaining about that, especially if somebody's using that information to start contacting their loved ones or them directly, trying to undermine the Russian war effort, which again, most people on the planet would not have a problem with. So heads up, there you go. That's going to be an interesting one to see that unfold. Moving on, let's talk about kitchenware company Meyer Corp. Now, they had a ransomware attack that targeted company data, including names, addresses, ethnicity, date of birth, gender, immigration status, and more of what I believe were their employees. I don't have much more at this time, but heads up to you if you use kitchenware company Meyer, or maybe you're shopping on their website, or maybe they're supplying the Targets of the world. I have no idea. It is not spelled Meyer like the chain store competitor to Target, Meyer, so I think it's a different company. Moving on. Let's talk about Fresno, California, because at a news conference about a week ago or so, Mayor Jerry Dyer announced that the city had lost more than $600,000 to online scammers who were targeting municipalities nationwide. An American suspect, interestingly enough, has been identified by the FBI. Now, in the news conference this past Thursday, or actually I believe it was a week ago Thursday, again, we're catching up on a few weeks here, Mayor Dyer said that two payments totaling $613,737 were made in January and March of 2020, so over 2 years ago. And this is basically what's going on. The city received two fake invoices that looked identical to invoices from a city contractor working on the construction of the Southwest Fresno Police Station. The fraud was discovered in April of that year when the contractor threatened to walk off the job due to not receiving payment, and that's again according to their mayor. The fraud was then reported to the Fresno Police Department, and eventually the investigation was handed over to the FBI in November of 2020. Now, at that time, according to their current mayor, the FBI requested that then Mayor Lee Brand not disclose the loss to the public to protect the investigation. And that is according to their current mayor, Mayor Dyer. So we'll see what's going on, but heads up, Fresno, California residents, all y'all got ripped off at the state level. Your tax dollars at work. Hopefully they're secure now. Moving on, let's talk about Seattle-based logistics and freight forwarding company Expeditors International. They were targeted in a cyber attack over basically a weekend about 7 days ago that forced the organization to shut down most of their operations worldwide. They are huge. They have a gross revenue of around $10 billion, 350 locations, and over 18,000 employees worldwide. So this is obviously a very huge thing. Its services include supply chain warehousing and distribution, distribution and all of that. Now, the company does not mention the type of cyber attack, but from the description and anonymous tip that was sent to Bleeping Computer, the conclusion is that they got hit with ransomware, and there you go. Now, what I find interesting about this is that it seems like ransomware has gone down a little bit in the last couple of weeks, primarily because, one, you've got ransomware gangs operating in and around Russia that are either engaged in cyber operations for Russia or defending Russia in some way, shape, or form, and other cyber criminals around the globe that have said we're going to take out Russia as a result of this war. So this list isn't nearly as long, but nevertheless, money is money, and so they are still looking at hitting wherever they are organizations globally. And so Toyota is no different. Yes, the Toyota, the massive car maker, basically is on this list as well, because Toyota Motors, about 2 weeks ago or so, halted operations at all of their plants in Japan after a major supplier was hit by a cyber attack disrupting the automaker's parts supply management system. Now, the company suspended 28 lines at 14 plants. The subsidiaries Hino Motors and Daihatsu Motor will also halt operations, or rather did halt operations around Japan as well. By virtue of this attack, the announcement that operations would be halted came on that Monday, and that's according to Nikkei, which is one of the news organizations in Japan. Now, the cyber attack hit Kojima Industries. This is the actual organization that got hit, and they supply plastic parts to Toyota. Now, Kojima announced that Tuesday morning that it had received a message demanding ransom, and they had confirmed the existence of a virus. It's hard enough right now to make cars with chip shortages and all of those other things, not to mention skyrocketing used markets. Hitting the plastic suppliers for car manufacturers, never a good thing. So hopefully Toyota is back on their feet. Hopefully prices will continue to stabilize. Toyota obviously being one of the largest car makers in the world. And speaking of automotive industry, we have to talk about Bridgestone Americas. They are essentially one of the largest tire makers in the world. They're investigating what they describe as a, quote, potential security incident at its facilities. Now, the company wouldn't confirm the investigation impact on the Firestone facility in Des Moines, Iowa. Bridgestone, if you didn't know, is the parent company of Firestone, another tire maker, but workers there said that the investigation disrupted normal activities at the Des Moines, Iowa plant that Sunday, about a week ago or so, and the Firestone plant has been in operation since 1945, and it produces tires for the agricultural industry and basically is one of the largest employers in Des Moines with 900 people employed there. So obviously, that's a huge thing. Hopefully, Bridgestone will get back on their feet sooner than later at their Des Moines, Iowa plant. Now, moving on. We need to talk about satellite communications giant Viasat, because they said a cyber attack was causing network outages about 2 weeks ago or so, around the beginning of the war. You see where I'm going with this. Essentially, a cyber attack was causing network outages, impacting internet service for fixed broadband customers in Ukraine and elsewhere on its European KA-SAT network. Now, the California-based company, which provides high-speed satellite broadband services, told ZDNet, where I'm getting this information, that the outages were essentially caused by a cyber attack. This appears to be possibly related to the war in Ukraine, as we have seen organizations, or rather I should say hacking collectives, hit satellite infrastructure, although the reporting that I talked about in my last Breaches of the Week was Network Brigade 65 or NB65 claiming to hit Russian spy satellites, figuring out a way in there and then shutting them down. So Viasat may be in that boat as well. For all we know, they're the ones providing the Russians with spy satellites on top of regular commercial service. So we'll see. I'm not making that claim for the record. Viasat, please don't sue me. I am simply speculating. There you go, just for the record. Moving on, we need to talk about Swedish camera giant Axis, because Axis said they are still struggling to deal with a cyber attack that hit their IT systems on February 20th. This basically, this reporting comes from about a week after or so, so hopefully they're back on their feet. But here's what was going on. In a message on their website, the Swedish camera giant said that they got alerts from their cybersecurity and intrusion detection systems that past Sunday 2 weeks ago, before it shut down all public-facing services globally in the hopes of limiting the impact on the attack. From what I understand, Axis is back online, hopefully more hardened than they were previously, and there you go. So if you use Axis cameras from Axis, heads up to you. Moving on. We have to talk about Doctors Without Borders. Now, cyber criminals are charging anywhere from $500 to $7,000 for access to the organization's computers. And there you go. Morals appear to have gone out the window as Doctors Without Borders have been targeted, as well as U.S. hospitals caught up in this as well. Now, basically, a Doctors Without Borders spokesperson said that the attack did not ultimately have any impact on its operations, but there you go. I remember reading about this a couple of weeks ago, and obviously Doctors Without Borders was basically pleading, hey, we've got doctors in war zones literally around the globe. Please don't get this information out there. We don't want to see our doctors killed. And here we are. That's always awful when we see those kinds of things. So there you go. If you're with Doctors with Borders, I hope you are safe wherever you are, Ukraine or otherwise. Moving on, I want to talk about Adafruit or Adafruit. They disclosed a data leak that occurred due to a publicly viewable GitHub repository. The company suspects this could have allowed unauthorized access to information about certain users on or before 2019. So we are looking at roughly 3-ish years ago for this. Now, they're based in New York City. And if you didn't know, Adafruit is a producer of open source hardware components. They've been around since 2005. They design, sell, manufacture electronic products, tools, accessories, all of that. And caught up in this GitHub repository breach is names, email addresses, shipping and billing addresses, order details, order placement statuses via payment processor or PayPal, and more. The data set, though, according to them, did not contain any user passwords or financial information such as credit card. However, the exposure of real user data, they're warning, could be used by spammers and phishing actors to target Adafruit's customers. So if you use them in any way, shape, or form for your development needs, heads up to you. Adafruit should be alerting you if they haven't already, and if not, consider this an alert. And finally, we have a couple of finalies for you today. We're going to be talking about Nvidia. Now, Nvidia, obviously the massive chip maker, they're known for their video cards as well as a whole bunch of other stuff, and creating essentially supercomputers with those processors and all of that. Now, they're headquartered in Santa Clara, California, which is in Silicon Valley. I've actually seen their facilities; they're gorgeous. Basically, they were affected this past Wednesday when its email system and developer, or actually, I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago, when its email system and developer resources went down following what the Telegraph reported to be a malicious network intrusion. Since then, it appears that parts of Nvidia's systems have returned. That's according to the Telegraph, but the company has yet to reveal the specifics of the cyber attack. I went looking. I don't think they've mentioned that so far, but obviously that's a huge problem. It's unclear at that time if any of their customers were affected. An Nvidia spokesperson talking to SF Gate, a local publication in San Francisco, in a statement said, and I quote, "We are investigating an incident. Our business and commercial activities continue uninterrupted. We are still working to evaluate the nature and scope of the event and don't have any additional information to share at this time." Now, the attack has been confirmed to basically be by Lapsus, if you remember them from Samsung and some of the others I've mentioned here today. They have been making essentially the rounds, and I'm not sure if they're based in Russia or they're a Russian cutout, but it's important to understand that if they are, this has actual serious ramifications for the war in Ukraine, meaning, here we go. Basically, this past Thursday, after the invasion, the White House imposed sanctions on microchips to Russia as part of their larger economic sanctions package that follows the invasion of Ukraine. The Biden administration, according to Reuters reporting on February 11th, also cautioned chip makers like Nvidia to expand their supply chain as key resources for making semiconductors are largely sourced in Russia. So obviously, that's a huge problem. Nvidia is the largest, if you didn't know that, microchip producer in the world, according to Motley Fool, the publication, with a market cap of more than $650 billion as of January. So this obviously is a huge, huge thing. And with that, we have one more finally for you as well. I want to give you an update on Russian websites. I talked about, obviously, these cyber attacks and cyber operations against Russia right now as they are looking to possibly cut off their internet. I have not heard a word of them actually doing that just yet. That was going to be on or about March 11th. We're on the 13th right now as I'm sitting here talking to you, so we'll see what goes on. But here's the latest update as of about March 10th or so, from what I've been able to find and source, and I figured this would be a good way to end. Even though we are talking about things outside of the war in Ukraine, we can't ignore that as well. So here's what's going on. Russia is saying that some of their federal agencies' websites were compromised in a supply chain attack this past Tuesday after unknown attackers hacked the stats widget used used to track the number of visitors by multiple government agencies. Now, the list of sites that were basically impacted, on their network was actually quite a bit. We are talking about essentially the websites of the Energy Ministry, the Federal Statistics Service, the Federal Penitentiary Service in Russia, the Federal Bailiff Service, which I assume is bailiff, like we have that here, the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, the Cultural Ministry, and other Russian state agencies. Now, the incident was discovered this past Tuesday evening after the attackers published their own content and then blocked access to the websites, meaning they shut out the administrators and they put up their own messages. Now, we've seen a lot of pro-Ukrainian messages and information go up on websites on state TV. I talked about that the other day, where essentially Anonymous claimed to have been able to hack Russia's state TV and start playing the Ukrainian national anthem and all that kind of stuff, delivering Ukrainian information into Russia, and that's obviously a huge thing. Also, on top of that, with a recent interview I saw from one of the last few Russian-based journalists that essentially oppose this, meaning they are not state-controlled, she had been mentioned on an interview in CNN that I just happened to be watching as I was getting ready here in my hotel room for the day, that basically Russia has been shutting everything down. The only available media now in Russia on all of the major public areas are Russian state-run TV sources, all that kind of stuff, and the only way you're able to get that is if you had an existing VPN, or get around it, I should say, had an existing VPN that allowed you to get out of Russia to start viewing blocked sites. Essentially, Russia is putting in their own version of the Great Firewall, not just to defend their country, but also to control the information. They have seen a lot of protests, and by virtue of that, they have been arresting citizens. And so the propaganda solution that they had come up with, while very comprehensive, goes back years and years and years and years, obviously wasn't totally holistic in nature, as you have specifically the younger generations essentially resisting this, and obviously not all of them. There's plenty that do support this, but this obviously is a huge thing. War is messy. So those were your breaches of the week. There's absolutely a ton of information out there. I'm just glad to be getting back to normal, even though I'm traveling here and talking about it. But again, the world keeps turning, even if part of the world is at war, and unfortunately we may be looking at World War III. Hopefully, obviously, I don't think anybody wants that, or most of us don't want that, but we'll see what happens. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.